Okay, and this is going to be a brief talk on cost management and version control systems. Two topics that are completely unrelated to one another, but in the sake of trying to get this done as quickly as possible, we'll just bundle them together into one video. Okay, so for cost management, what we want to think about as an organization is we've got to manage our costs. So we talked about in the very beginning about how cloud systems allow us to move uh, from capital expenditures for data centers and hardware and large software expenses to more of an operational cost model that aligns with our uh, business growth as well as contractions in our business. And so by really managing our costs and watching those costs, we can better plan and budget according to our organization's revenue. And so one of the methods we can do this is from the very beginning when we're starting to think about what we're going to do out in the cloud, we think about what we need for adequate sizing and scoping. And so we'll use cloud calculators. And I've provided some links in the materials for this week on how to use cloud calculators. Okay. And there are cloud calculators for Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, as well as multi-cloud calculators that can tell you the cost across the board. Okay. You can also go put together spreadsheets to do analysis, that sort of thing. But for the financial analysis, you have to turn around and think about what's the total cost of ownership of your infrastructure, not just the cloud infrastructure that you're going to build, but your support costs. So when you've got an on-premise infrastructure, your own data center, you've got all those costs, you've got a lot of people costs. You are able to trim a lot of the costs by moving to the cloud, but you can't trim all of the people costs. There are going to be people costs, and sometimes those people are more expensive than people who run a traditional on-premise environment. You're also going to have automation technologies, which will make things much more efficient for you. So you've got to look at that whole picture of the cost. So yes, the cloud calculators will tell you what the cost of the raw infrastructure is, but you also have to think about the cost overall. And then do a comparison of the cost between your on-premise current model, the way you do things, as well as your cost proposed to move to the cloud. Okay? Now, once you've deployed infrastructure, you also want to make sure that you're managing your cost appropriately. Those costs can get out of control very quickly if you're not careful. When you're running in a gated environment like your Amazon Web Services educate environment, once you run out of credits, your account gets deleted. Okay? You don't have to worry about it. On the Google side, your account will get deleted if you don't get additional credit from me. Okay? And then if with a real Google environment or in a real AWS environment, if you don't put a credit card on file, uh, they'll shut your account down too. Okay? So you've got to be careful and make sure that you're managing your costs and you're not unnecessarily running things that you actually don't need. So one of the tools that you can use is that cloud calculator in the beginning. But then So we want to make sure we manage our cloud resources and we manage them to our actual business. So let's use the example of we are a some sort of e-commerce platform, okay? And our busy time of the year is coming up here. Okay, we do most of our sales in the last quarter of the calendar year, and so we're expecting to do a lot of business. But for the rest of the year, we have pretty flat revenue, and we don't have a lot of needs for our website. Okay. Um, so during the bulk of the year, we can run at a certain state of infrastructure. But as we get to October, November, December, we probably need to spike our infrastructure, which is what makes the cloud extremely attractive to us. Okay. We can scale up if needed. So a lot of these cloud providers will start telling you if you're under or overutilizing resources. Okay. So from a resource perspective, we think about things like uh, CPU, memory, disk space, load balancers, number of instances, etc. Okay. Uh, So if we're trying to manage our costs, we might run with 3 or 4 instances per region in a smaller sized virtual machine or container for the whole year. And then we get to October, we want to be able to change and scale out and grow bigger. So we will then be able to scale up or scale out our platform accordingly. And so we want to be able to manage that cost, and then come December, we want to be able to turn things down. Okay, so we want to be able to manage those costs, and the best way to manage those costs is to automatically provision and deprovision resources. And so we can use things like Terraform for that sort of purpose. Now, we're using the open source Terraform, which is more than sufficient for the purposes of this class. Okay, but in the enterprise edition, there's something called cost management. So I provided a link to that if you're interested in taking a look at it. None of you are going to be able to go sign up for Terraform Enterprise. It's far too costly for any of you. Okay, unless you're really wealthy. In that case, go right ahead. But we're talking a lot of money for you to have it, and really, it's not going to help you as a student, anyways. Okay? Let your future employer buy that if you need the features of that. But the reason I bring that up is it gives you the ability to manage those costs, okay? So that you can ensure that your cost of cloud are aligned with your revenue. Okay? Then we don't get a surprise bill from Amazon at the end of the month because one of your employees accidentally left a database machine running. Okay? I also mention this so that you can be careful about what you provision for the hypothetical. Okay? Um, if you go and leave your environment up for your project, you will quickly deplete your credits. Okay, so be sensible. Even if your architecture says that you're going to have 3 regions and you're going to have 10 VMs per region, that's 30 VMs. You don't need to build 30 VMs. You can build a representation of that architecture by building, say, one region out with 2 VMs and another region out with 2 VMs. Okay, you could replicate that type of environment if you wanted to on a much smaller scale. Okay, so think about that from a cost management perspective. Okay, you're also going to want to think about costs associated with managing this. Okay, in the hypothetical for the project, for example, you only have a staff of 5 people. So you're going to have to come up with an architecture that's simple enough that you don't need a huge army of resources to manage it. In a real scenario, you might be able to have a large team supporting this stuff. And so you're going to have a much more complex environment. But with only 5 people, you're going to have to manage things so you can manage the costs. Now, that's all I want to say about cost management. You need to think about those sorts of things. One more thing is in your presentation, there's probably not a bad idea for you to think about the return on investment, right, and having an ROI slide. And an ROI slide that is just a spreadsheet is extremely boring, and I guarantee you is going to look really poorly in a presentation, and you're going to lose my interest. Just like you would lose anybody else's interest, okay? Make it visually stimulating. Show me the ROI of moving to the cloud versus your on-premise environment. On-premise, you're going to have big data centers you have to pay for. Cooling, air conditioning is expensive, power is expensive. Um, And I believe that I said that the data center is in California, which means it's even more expensive. You're going to have hardware to purchase, software licenses, tons of people to manage all of that. So, and then you're going to have things like internet circuits and networking and all that good stuff. So that's extremely costly. So show me a positive return on investment. So even if I have to pay something to move to the cloud and it's going to cost me money, can I recoup that investment over a couple of years? Okay. If I can recoup that investment within, say, 3 years, then it's probably a no-brainer for me to move to the cloud. Okay. So think about that as you're coming up with your presentation for your project. Look at the ROI. Okay. The other thing to look at is your total cost of ownership. Okay. When you're calculating the ROI, you want to look at the total cost of ownership. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see students make is they only consider the cloud infrastructure costs. Okay. You've got to think about what it would cost you to run your infrastructure in addition to the cloud infrastructure costs. You're going to have people costs. Maybe you could do it with people, maybe you can do it with less than 5 people, okay? But you're not going to get any more people to run your cloud. So you've got to figure out a way to make it more efficient. Think about how you could automate things. Okay? We're going to do some more examples as part of the homework activities in the class. Now, shifting gears to the version control systems. This is going to be a very short lecture. Okay? You've got some activities you need to do with GitHub. GitHub is one of the version control systems. Okay? Git is another one that you're going to use. You're going to use Git to connect to GitHub, as opposed to running Git locally. GitLab is another version control system that you might encounter. Okay? And then GitLab has other features besides just version control. The purpose of version control systems, and if we look historically, we had things like RCS was the original one that I can think of. Okay? Revision control system. We had CVS, concurrent versioning system, not the pharmacy, by the way. What was some of the others? Subversion was another one. It was an offshoot of CVS, kind of improving CVS. And then we end up with Git, and Git's been around for a while now. And Git has begot GitHub and GitLab. Okay? And so we're working with GitHub because they have a nice student program where we can get free access for you to use. Okay? But there's nothing wrong with you learning GitLab on your own time. Okay? So GitHub is what we're using to do version control, but why would we want to do version control? Well, the reason why we want to do version control is it gives us the ability to use automation tools, revert changes, and have an audit infrastructure in place of all the changes to our systems. Okay? If we enforce making every change through version control, yes, in the beginning it might seem like a lot of extra overhead. But in the long term, it gives us an audit trail. Who made what change? When did they make it? Why did they make it? What did it affect? Etc. Okay? So it can be very powerful for us. You're going to be using version control in combination with our automation software, okay, to manage the configurations for Terraform. So it's going to be very critical that you learn how to use the version control systems. Okay. Now, without version control, what happens? We end up doing things like renaming a file. So taking a file, making a copy, and naming it .1, .2, .3, or .date, or .back, .backup2, .backup3. Okay. Pretty soon you end up with a mess of files. You don't know which one's the legitimate file. You don't know when a particular file was made, and it's very difficult for you to go back and compare those files. Okay? But if we use version control, that is all tracked for us automatically. Okay? So version control is a critical enabler for cloud-based environments. Okay? We can't manage cloud scale, which could be thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions, or many times the millions mark of virtual machines, cloud storage, networking environments, etc. Okay. If you go out into the workplace and you establish yourself in an MIS or IT career, you are not going to find any environment these days that uses cloud resources at scale who is doing all of the work manually. Okay. You might think it's saving your job if you don't do that. It is not. Okay? Those who fight automation end up becoming a victim of it. Okay? Embrace it, utilize it. It's there to make your job easier. And guess what? Someone always has to manage the automation. Okay? All right, so that is it for this week's lecture. Make sure you're also looking at all the demo videos that I posted. There's a ton of them out there for individual things. And make sure that you've done all the readings as well.